just remember this weight. It's like, you can't be in the Navy anymore. We need to process you out. And it's just kind of, your head fades out and it kind of turns into like, Snoopy's, Linus's teachers, Charlie Brown's teacher. And it's like, wah, 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 wah. And it's just like words happening. And you just kind of drift out of your body. And it's just like, you're watching the situation devolve.
Welcome to Veteran CEO Magazine, where veterans lead the way. I'm Jay Hernandez, and today my guest is Tony Taravainen. Tony is the CEO and co-founder of Support the Enlisted Project, or STEP, a San Diego-based nonprofit dedicated to providing junior military and recent veteran families financial grants in times of crisis and working with them to help achieve financial self-sufficiency. Before founding STEP, Tony was a nuclear planner and estimator for nuclear reactors and power plants on submarines while in the Navy. And he's also held several leadership and advisory roles, including as an adjunct professor at the University of San Diego Noss School of Business. Tony, thank you so much for joining us today.
Really happy to be here with you today, Jonathan, to share.
So Tony, every single episode of VCEO starts the same way. I ask my guests to please describe their transition from military to civilian life in 6 words or fewer, or as close as you can get to that.
Yeah, so my transition happened in 1995, and it was a medical retirement. And I would say that it was a slow motion train wreck that I was just a spectator for.
When we talk about transition, that sounds like there was a lot to happen for your train wreck. And I'm curious, if you're willing, can you kind of talk about what that train wreck was like? What did you go through?
Yeah, it was definitely a challenging time. I think before relevant to the story is before my service, I was also a military kid. So my dad was career Air Force. So my entire childhood was moving around the world, living on these giant Air Force bases. And I very much adopted this military mentality. And he finally retired. And somehow my friends got me into college. When I showed up on the campus at Old Dominion University, I just kind of like wheeled back in my hole, and I wasn't able to connect. I was very frustrated. Nothing was working. I couldn't show up at the right classes on time. I couldn't get the right books. And in retrospect, I look back on that time, and I see that actually as my first transition out of the military. It was a very similar experience that veterans feel when they're just like airdropped right in the middle of regular society. And I stopped going to class. For whatever reason, I walked into a Navy recruiter's office, and I'd never seen Navy uniforms. I didn't understand Navy ranks. I didn't know what they did. My dad knew somebody there, and he just said, "Go there." And I did. But when I walked in the door, there was this peace that came over me that I hadn't felt in a long time. And it was just, I guess we could say it was ordained that I was going to join, and it was just a given fact at that point. But it was really interesting to understand, like, getting back into this military environment, one that I really wasn't familiar with, but internally in my core, I really was. And they said, "What do you want to do?" And I asked to see a catalog, and they're like, "Okay." And I got to E, I saw they had electricians, and I said, "Well, I'm an electrician. I'll do that." And that was it. So I joined the military, got into the nuclear power field, got on submarines, and it was a great time. I could just get back to work, and it was very much like my childhood. It was very much like I was used to seeing in my father's perspective, where people would, spend a lot of time together. They would party together. We would always have like squadron parties or whatever, and they would get the work done. And the families kind of went along with it for the ride. And I put everything I had into that military experience. And somewhere along the way, I got sick and had some internal medical issues that kind of persisted over the years, and they were never diagnosed. I would just keep going to the hospital, and they would keep giving me aspirin and telling me to go back to class or go back to work. And finally figured out what it was. And, by then I'd been in for about 7 years, I guess. I was on my second duty station out here in San Diego as the nuclear planner for Submarine Squadron, and they said you can't be in the military with this. And I was like, oh, but I can't not be in the military. It's like, you can't take this away from me. And they said, no, we're sorry, we're going to have to medically retire you. And that was really a crushing blow. And all I could think to do was figure out how to keep my job. And I probably was begging, but I won't be on any hot reactors. I won't go to sea for any sea trials. I won't go to sea with the tender. I won't do this. I won't do that. Just let me keep my job. And they finally agreed to. They said, all right, we'll let you do this as long as you're able. And you can do this until you're up for orders. And as soon as your detailer calls to figure out what boat to go back to, then we're going to start processing you out. And I didn't quite make it that long. The issues got worse before they got better.
It sounds like you had planned on staying in the military. That was your environment.
I hadn't planned on either, and I think inertia probably would have kept me in.
Mm-hmm.
That's a question I get a lot, and honestly, I had never thought about it. I progressed very quickly through the ranks, and I think by 4 years I was an E6.
For our viewers who don't recognize E6 in that short amount of time is very significant. That's moving up at a blazing speed.
I had a great opportunity to be able to actually pick it up, and then even if I'm going to be retired, I could be retired as an E7, not an E6. But I didn't take advantage of that opportunity. But yeah, I probably would have stayed in, and I loved the work. I didn't enjoy the politics like nobody does, and we all grumbled. But being a nuke on a fast attack submarine and being out there with whatever there is, probably 60 people, 50 people in the engineering department, and your job is just to make it keep going, keep the lights on and the screw turning, and everything in between is your space to manage.
There's so many areas here that I think veterans and also veteran families could really start to understand, because you mentioned being a military family, coming from that and going back to it, that was so much what you knew, so it felt like going back into what you already knew in that environment. And then you were told that you were no longer going to be able to do that. You were having a lot of success in your career, and being told that, sorry, that's not the path, that's not what your future is going to hold for you. In a perfect environment, when we talk about military transition, because that's what VCEO is about, is that transition, we would get to plan all of that stuff out. We would get to say, all right, I know I'm familiar with this, I want to do this, I want to be able to do that. But that wasn't necessarily your case. You didn't get that choice on there. So walk me through just that initial feeling when you were told, like, you don't get to stay in the military. What was that impact like for you?
That was a heavy blow. Yeah. I'll tell you that, the illness was pancreatitis, and my pancreas, I probably started with like an acute pancreatitis episode, and they didn't diagnose it for 7 years. So it turned into chronic, and it wasn't going to reverse, and it was basically destroyed. So when I finally got to San Diego, as all this was blossoming, the person the doctor on the tender that takes care of all the nukes is the diving officer. And so he was looking at my medical record, and he's just like, why are you always going to the hospital getting aspirin? I'm like, I don't know, I got some kind of stomach ache. He's like, we probably need to figure this out. So he just basically kept sending me back to the hospital for tests. And he was the first person that really took interest in it. And eventually they figured out what it was. And, it kind of boo on the military for the way they did that. But I remember I went down at Balboa at the hospital, and I think they were like, I don't know, looking for kidney stones or something, but they were doing an ultrasound. And it was these two hospital corpsmen techs, and they were Monday morning, they were talking about their weekend, this, that, and the other thing. And they're literally like just chatting away as they're doing this. And then all of a sudden somebody goes, "What was that?" And I was like, sit up, they're like, "Lay down." And then I go back and like, "This is over here." And he's like, "You better go get the chief." And he goes and gets the chief, and chief comes in, and he's like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "We were doing this, but we saw this." And he yells at him for, looking in the wrong place or something. I don't know. And he says, "Go get the lieutenant." And the lieutenant comes in. He says, "Go get the captain." And the captain comes in. And then the captain's like, "Okay, have him come see me." It's like, all right. And they're like, "Clean yourself up, get dressed, and go see the captain." I'm like, "Okay." So I go to see the captain. And he said, "How long you felt like this?" And I was like, "I don't know, 6 or 7 years." And he's like, "And you're on the tender?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "All right, go back to the tender and have the diving officer call me." And I was like, "Great." So, it's like, again, this is what civilians don't understand about the military, right? It's like, it's not about you, right? It's about this billet. And what concerns the billet really doesn't concern you as the employee, like on the outside, right? It's just like, I'm just this widget. And you accept that. So, of course, I drive all the way back to the tender. I get up on the tender. I go back to the diving officer. I wait for him to get his appointments done. I see him, and he goes like, "What'd they say?" I said, "They found something." He said, "What was it?" I said, "I don't know. They didn't tell me. You're supposed to call this other guy." So he calls him. And then I was sitting there. I remember I was sitting at the end of his desk. And he finally gets a hold of the guy. He's like, "Uh-huh, uh-huh, 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 uh-huh. Are you sure?" "Yes, sir." "Okay. Uh-huh. Okay, thank you. Bye." He like hangs up the phone, and he stares at me. And he just goes, "This is not good." And I said, "What do you mean not good?" And he goes, you can't be in the Navy with this." And that's when he said that. And I just like, "What is it?" And then they explain it to me, but of course that makes no sense whatsoever. And I just remember this weight. It's like, "You can't be in the Navy anymore. We need to process you out." And it's just kind of, your head fades out, and it kind of turns into like, Snoopy's, Linus's teachers, Charlie Brown's teacher, and it's like wah 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 wah, and it's just like words happening, and you just kind of drift out of your body, and it's just like you're watching the situation devolve. And that's what it felt like. It was just, my life was all just being taken away, and it was just very dramatic. And however I reacted to it probably wasn't the best way, but yeah, it was massive. And all I could think to do was just like, how do I save this situation? And that was where I really started to kind of beg. I found it hard to describe why I needed to try to defend my position and stay in the military. And there's a book, Outlaw Platoon, Sean Parnell. And I read that years later, probably audiobook. But he, in there, it's a story about, I believe, an Army National Guard unit that gets deployed to Afghanistan for 12 months. And they went out and worked on an FOB, which is kind of a remote forward operating base. And I think they described their mission as, they had an area the size of Rhode Island up on the Afghan-Pakistan border, and their job was to disrupt the flow of the Taliban. And it's kind of a chronology of what happens, and obviously the days take many pages, and then the days take less pages as the book goes on. But 2 or 3 months in, maybe a month in, he took an RPG within like 10 feet of him, and it blew him several feet through the air. And for the rest of the tour, he had goo running out of his ear. And the way he described it, I was very connected to, because he knew he probably should go get it checked out, but he knew if he get it checked out that it was going to be over and he was going to get pulled out of there. So he just kept like cotton in his ear or something, whatever he did, for the entire tour. And every time somebody told him to go get it checked out, he's like, "No, I'm okay. I can make it work." And after they return stateside, you know, he finally goes to his doctor, and they're like, this is cerebral fluid that's been like leaking out of your brain for 9 months or whatever it is. Why didn't you come get this checked? And he's just like, I couldn't leave, right? It's like, you're just that attached to the job, and the job sucked, right? And every day there sucked, and there was nothing good there to keep him there other than him being able to fulfill his duty about completing the job that he got sent over there for. And I mean, that's like, I don't remember a lot for some reason of the books I read, but it's like, that just stuck with me because that was the same thing I was feeling. It's like, you can't take this away from me. And a lot of our military folks feel that way. There's at STEP, we're getting a lot of attention from the mental health folks, right? Chronic financial stress is debilitating to the mind, body, and soul, and it's the leading catalyst for suicides. So how can we work with, improving people's financial wellness to reduce suicides is a question we're trying to answer right now with the VA and DOD. And I'm getting invites to these conventions, and I just went to the VA DOD convention. They had a great speaker up there. It wasn't even that. I think it was Calvet. But anyway, he got up there and talked about this issue with transitioning and why people get out of the military have a hard time adapting. And I don't know if I'm getting ahead in our interview here.
No, go for
it. So one of the things I talk about when I go to transition summits and asked to speak on the topic, it's like you have to liken this transition to, you're moving to a different society. You're moving to a place with different norms. So pretend that you're going to move to New Zealand, Canada, another English-speaking country. It's like, yeah, you can read the signs. You can figure out how to feed yourself. But it's like, can you integrate into that society without getting these minute societal norms and differences? And this speaker, he researched this, and he was trying to figure out why it was so difficult on this cultural level. And then people are always kind of missing this time in the military. And he actually likened it to, now I can't think of the words, phantom limb syndrome.
Really?
Yes. And it was just everybody's head in the room. There's 400 people in the room, and our heads just we thought about it for a minute, and everybody in the room got it. Where the limb is you being part of this integrated machine, right? You are a subject matter expert on a high performing team, right? There's no room for fat, and you're always running 3 people short in your group anyway, right? And so your job is to get it done, and you take great pride in that. And it's the sense of duty, it's the sense of responsibility that you don't even know you have, right? That's being pulled out that ties you to it. And now all of a sudden you're in general population. And if you show up for a meeting 5 minutes late, it doesn't matter. And if you don't hit deadlines, it doesn't matter. And if things don't work, it doesn't matter. And it's just this different environment. And the phantom limb is really you longing, you wanting, feeling like you have to be or have part of this, but now you're in this place. And so and suffice to say, it's a very complex psychological issue that is very hard to explain, but those are 2 good ways to help kind of describe it.
Mm-hmm.
And and I went through all that. But like I said, thankfully I found this job at Sony, which was a very militaristic environment. And then slowly I could let that out. And then, I don't know if you're familiar with San Diego, but I was living in North Park, and I get this job, and I asked job at Sony, and I was like, "Where's the job at?" And he said, "Rancho Bernardo." And he's like, "Hello, are you still there?" And I said, Can I commute there, or do I have to move?" And the guy's like, "It's like 20 miles away, you idiot." I'm like, I don't know. I don't even know. And it's like, there's so much I don't know. And I mean, he was just baffled that I didn't know the name of a town still inside the city of San Diego, 20 miles away. And that's what it's like when you transition out of the military. There's just so much you don't know. So yeah, understanding that's just a process, and you just take little pieces at a time, and you can't tackle it like you're going to be Superman. There's no way you can dive headfirst into just being a civilian. You have to, and everybody's path is different because everybody's history is different and everybody's uniquely different as well.
The assumption that's made a lot of times with military transition is that people are getting out and they're already going to be financially stable. That they're exiting the military and they've got all this experience and they're working. And in a perfect scenario, that would be the case. That they're working great. They get to retire when they choose to retire. They finish their job. They can step into the next one. And the next job takes off. And by the way, they've got the next house picked out. The next, finances are great. The living situation is great. And that's the ideal situation.
Right.
But that's not real life for a lot of service members when they transition. And sometimes they don't have just those foundational pieces that are enable them to have that kind of transition. So that's where I wanted to ask my next question for supporting the Enlisted Project step. How did you come to found that? What was your motivation behind it to help veterans?
Some people have a great transition like that, and that does work. But I think if you go back to this concept that this is not about me, it's about the greater good of my unit, squadron responsibility, etc. This concept of doing stuff for you really doesn't exist. That's not what's nurtured in the military. And less than 20% of the military actually do a 20-year tour and retire. So there's most people are getting, vast majority of people are getting out along the way, and most of that happens 4 to 8 years into service. So what we're doing is taking a bunch of people that have not been focusing at all on themselves, right? It's about survival. If they're married, they're trying to keep their family together and their career and job going with this inner sense of duty that just pulls them like people talk about the instinctuality of wolves. And that's kind of how I see these pictures. And this is the leaders in that wolf pack. They're keeping their families together, but they're going out every day doing jobs for the greater pack. And if they die doing it or whatever, it's like whatever that becomes their role. So they're giving up so much to be able to do that. And then what you're going to say to them is, okay, now prep for getting out. Well, you've never prepped them to prep for themselves. So this is a transition. They've never really had the time needed to think about it, what they would do in their future. So now you're just going to take them and drop them in these classes and ask them questions to be like, what color is your parachute? And it's like, what do I need a parachute for? It's just a different way of thinking. These people are not, they don't lack intelligence. They don't lack motivation. They don't lack wherewithal. They just haven't been using those skills, and they don't know to use the skills, and they don't know that's part of the transition. So they try to attack their transition with this military thinking, which keeps them behind the 8 ball. They try to just let's get these levels of effort and these lines of effort figured out, and we'll attack, and I can do these things. And that's not how that's not the best way to transition to the military. So we see a lot of people like that in the military. I got to a position where I was asked to do a long-term strategy, lead a strategy development process for a nonprofit that helped military families. I grew up in a military family. I was a young enlisted submariner. I can get that. Strategy was my day job at the point. And so I said I'd do it. And I learned about the nonprofit model. I led this, nonprofit through the exercise. And then I stayed and helped them get their action plans together. And then they asked me to join their board of directors. And I went to my first board meeting, And they just started talking about all this stuff. And I was like, wow, I never really thought about it like from the inside looking out. And I have started 4 or 5 small companies. So I got business. One of my degrees is business management. So I get the business side of it. I got the military side of it, but now it's like the actual technical operations of the nonprofit. So I started going to a lot of these events we were doing. A lot of them were distribution events where we'd hand stuff out. And so I know those people standing in line, right? That's me, my brother, sister, my friends, my parents. I get that part. And then we're like kind of handing the stuff out. One of the things we did hand out was money to people that couldn't pay their bills too. And it was kind of the thing we talked about the most, but did the least. And none of this stuff had any kind of ROI. And it's like, how are we measuring success in this? Like how much stuff, we dump out on the street and give to people. And then why are these rules about managing the people? It seems like the priority is on emptying the truck versus giving the people what they need. And I didn't kind of like that culture. I didn't like the lack of metrics. And then the real question is like, great, how are we helping these people? If we're here to help these people, what does help look like? Are we helping them survive? Are we helping them thrive? And it's like, let's do something so they don't need to come back in this line. It's like, how are we moving the needle? And that was really the impetus for STEP. I was given an opportunity to create STEP. And I took that idea of, we handed out money to help people pay their bills, but like, how do I maximize the ROI on that action, right? How do I make it better for them, for me, and this team that was following me, and for the donor that gave us the money, right? And the answer quickly became, well, make it matter, right? And how do you make it matter? Well, let's then use this money to somehow make it so they never need to get money again, and they can just go reach their fullest potential on their own and take care of their own lives, but get them over this hump. And in this thinking of, if they get out of the military, they don't know how to think in this civilian world, and they don't know how to think about themselves and their future. The process that we built was really designed to help them get into this way of thinking, where they can manage their finances for the long term. And this is something you don't learn in the military. This is something you don't learn during a transition process. And this is something that 3 out of 5 Americans spend their entire paycheck or more each month anyway. So most of Americans don't get it anyway. So let's provide this value. And that really became the STEP thing. I was doing it while I was working at Booz Allen, doing consulting, strategy, process improvement, change management, and I essentially quit Booz Allen to run STEP. And I said I liked the idea so much, I wanted to succeed. I said I'd do it until it didn't need me anymore. And once kind of proved concept, and then we proved demand, then we kind of got our house in order, and then people were calling me from across the country, so we started expanding slowly. And now we're on a 10-year mission or 10-year vision, I guess, to continue to expand across the country and be available for all of our young military and transitioning veteran families to help them with their financial challenges.
If you could go back to and talk to you on that day that you were told that, you have to get out of the military today, what's the one piece of advice you would give yourself?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the one thing I would say, would be really, you're going to get through this, because, we're all unique individuals. And one of the things that you don't learn in the military is that everybody's different. Everybody gets taught the same, trained the same, expected to do the same. As you kind of go up in your leadership, you realize that some people need a little more of this and some people need a little more of that. Some people are hotter runners than others. They need more development. Some people do better in the books and some people do better with their hands. That's about all you get, right? As I've gone through with my education, various leadership you start to see people, they're more complex puzzles. And what the veterans need to know is they all got a unique experience in the military. They had a unique experience before the military. They were unique. Then they got a unique set of experiences pre-military. They got a unique set of experiences during the military. So getting out, they're not just like every other veteran, right? They have their story, their experiences, their strengths, their weaknesses. Now, as they go forward in their life, there's various things they can do, not just, if you were a truck mechanic in the Army, you can't just be a truck mechanic on the outside. And it's okay not to know. I think life is more about this journey and this path, right? And as you pick up these prizes, trinkets, experiences, education along the way, you be able to create these different paths. And when I was standing there as a young board member for that first nonprofit, and I said, I understand who's standing in line. It's like, I get those people. That was me for my first 26 years. Inherently, culturally, I get it. I know what they're thinking in their head because I was thinking it, right? But in the 18 years between those two times, I had become a very highly educated, very highly experienced entrepreneur and problem solver. So really, at that point, I was like uniquely prepared to be able to now look back at my past and say, I see problems with that. Oh, and look, I've developed all these skills to solve problems, right? How can I use these skills to go back here? I never thought I'd be in a nonprofit space. I never saw myself as a social warrior or any of this other stuff. It just seemed like, wow. And I had a great job. I took a giant pay cut to leave Booz Allen to jump into a job nobody else would take. I couldn't hire a CEO. It was just nobody would touch it. And I just said, if this is going to succeed, I need to do it. And my wife rolled her eyes at me. And she's like, as long as we make it, you can go do what you want. And I jumped in and I managed and handled it like I handled everything in the Navy. Like I handled everything afterwards, all the other businesses I built that essentially the military life had prepared me for in my military childhood. So those skills all got used. And I continued to take it further and further and further. And, people say this is great and fantastic. And to me, it's still a daily grind. We're still trying to grow it. We still have lots of challenges. But I can also see now that I was the only person to do it, right? And a lot of people I've met along the way, I hire tons of veterans and military spouses. Everybody in the office is veteran, military affiliated somehow. And I see how they uniquely fit, into our structure. And it's not what they did in the military, but they bring themselves, they bring their past experiences, they bring their military experiences, and they bring it to us, and we can figure out how to make it work. And so, yeah, it was a crushing blow to have it all taken away from me. But, it all works out in the end as long as you continue to press forward. You try to gain knowledge and grow and just attack challenges. You got to be on the front edge of the seat. You can't be leaning back.
As you went through all of this, there were so many learning opportunities that in your story you took advantage of. You saw those opportunities as an opportunity to learn and grow. It didn't come without hard work. That's something that I've heard a lot. Just as you go through each one of these, is you had to put in that work for all of it. Just any closing thoughts for people watching, either coming up, they know that transition's coming, or maybe they just got notification that maybe they were planning that military career and they're going to have to transition out earlier than expected. Any closing thoughts for our listeners like that?
Yeah, I would just say the future's bright. our society, our companies, our communities, they need people like you, right? Based in values, determined, people that have accomplished something. That those are all lacking qualities out there in our communities, in our schools, in our churches, and in our workplaces. And you don't have to wear this veteran thing on your sleeve. It's baked into you at varying degrees for everybody. But what you bring to the table is a needed skill set and needed experiences. And it's not, you can't look at it like there's no hope for me and there's no place for me out there. It's like, oh my gosh, there's a void waiting for you to fill it, right? You just need to get out there and find it. And, a lot of people push veterans to, figure out what they want to be when they grow up and go do it, and don't waste your time doing a bunch of things along the way. And that's not really the case. You have the sense of duty now to yourself and your family, and that's the one you need to assume. You need to give everybody their fair shake and, honor and respect the time, but you can move from job to job. You can, as I think probably less than 10% of the people that get out of the military, the first job they get, they knew it existed when they got out of the military. I think 9 out of 10 people get a job, their first job, they didn't even know that job existed. It's like, you don't know what is even nearly within the realm of possibility to be able to do when you get out. And I mean, high schoolers probably feel this way too. High schoolers think they can only be 3 things when they grow up. A doctor, an engineer, or a business person or something. It's like there's so much in between. So just get out there, get a job that you can be proud of, that meets your needs, work on it honestly, give it a fair shake. And as you get out there, you start to build these networks, and everybody cringes when they hear the network word, but it's not about getting more friends on Facebook, right? It's about getting around people that have been different places than you and understanding their perspectives, what they know, and then meeting their friends. And you're growing your community, not just your followers. And as you start to grow into this new area and this new environment, you're going to learn so much more. You're going to find out about other opportunities. You're going to find out about potential passion areas or not, and then kind of shift tack. But yeah, so there's hope out there. The community needs you, workplace needs you, and the networks out there can help you get there.
Well, Tony, I just want to thank you one more time for taking the time to join us here on Veteran CEO Magazine.
Thank you. Really happy to be here to share, Jonathan.
This is Veteran CEO Magazine, where veterans lead the way.